Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, where we're following multiple developments surrounding the nationwide backlash over the Trump administration's deadly immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis, including from lawmakers on Capitol Hill, where a dispute over ICE funding could lead to a government shutdown tomorrow. That comes as White House border czar Tom Homan, who is now in charge of ICE operations in Minneapolis, is trying to turn down the temperature, acknowledging there are issues on the ground that need to be fixed. And as the president held a cabinet meeting today, but made no mention of Minnesota or his immigration enforcement operations. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem was not among those cabinet members the president called on to speak. But the president did say he's working with Democrats to strike a deal to keep the government open, even as Democrats voted to block a package of government funding bills in protest of ICE tactics. Take a listen.
Hopefully we won't have a shutdown. And we're working on that right now. I think we're getting close. The Democrats, I don't believe, want to see it either. So we'll work in a very bipartisan way, I believe, not to have a shutdown. We don't want a shutdown.
Senate Democrats are demanding changes to DHS and ICE in the wake of the killing of Alex Preddy by a federal agent last weekend. Meanwhile, Tom Homan today saying he's working on a drawdown plan for the Border Patrol and ICE agents in Minneapolis and saying progress is being made.
Everybody I talked to agreed on was that community safety is paramount. One thing we all agreed on was U.S. Immigration Customs Enforcement is a legitimate law enforcement agency that has a duty to enforce the laws enacted by Congress and keep this community safe. What we've been working on is making this operation safer, more efficient, by the book. The mission is going to improve because of the changes we're making it internally. We will conduct targeted enforcement operations. Targeted.
Homan also saying immigration operations will continue in the city and that a drawdown of federal forces will only happen if local authorities agree to cooperate with federal agents. Here he is talking about that.
We are not surrendering the president's mission on immigration enforcement. Let's make that clear. Prioritization of criminal aliens doesn't mean we forget about everybody else. That's just simply ridiculous. My main focus now is drawdown based upon the great conversations I've had with your state and local leaders. Again, I'm not a fool. I'm not walking away without seeing this put in place. But I take the word of the people I met with. I think they're honest, and I think they're good brokers, that they want public safety protected, and they also want what's happening in the city to go away.
Now, this all comes as new video has emerged. You see it here. This is of shooting victim Alex Preddy and a confrontation he had with federal officers 11 days before he was shot and killed by a Border Patrol agent. The video shows him kicking a vehicle and agents tackling him to the ground. Preddy's family confirming to NBC News they knew about this incident before he was killed. We, of course, do not know what happened before the start of this video. Joining me now is our team of reporters, NBC News Chief White House Correspondent Peter Alexander, NBC News Correspondent Camila Bernal in Minneapolis, and NBC News Senior Homeland Security Correspondent Julia Ainsley. Peter, let me start with you at the White House. The president held his first cabinet meeting of the new year. What was your biggest takeaways? We didn't hear from Kristi Noem.
Yeah, Kristen, you're right. So this was the 10th cabinet meeting overall that the president has held since returning to the White House, as you note, the first one of this new year. Notably, only the second time in all the cabinet meetings that have been public, which is all of them but one, where Kristi Noem was not called on by the president to speak. It was particularly striking, an opportunity where he may have had to, in front of the cameras, with her alongside him, publicly praise her work, show his support for her. He has said that he stands by her right now and is happy with the way she has handled her job. But obviously she's facing a lot of blowback and a firestorm of criticism, not just from Democrats, but frankly from some Republicans as well, for her handling of the situation regarding ICE, specifically in Minneapolis in recent days. And what it tells me, the fact that she wasn't called on and the fact that this was significantly shorter, only about an hour and 20 minutes. You'll remember in a recent interview, the president said that those meetings needed to be quicker. They were, in his words, boring as hell. What it says is that the president really is doing all he can in his power to try to turn the page from this topic. As you and I have been discussing off air, the fact that the president is ultimately into optics. He recognizes the ways things play. He is a showman. He is a former reality TV star, and he realizes that the headlines weren't in his favor. The images weren't reflecting well on him or his administration. So clearly he wanted as best possible to use this to pivot and to focus on other issues that he believes are top of mind for voters and for Americans right now, like the economy. He's going to be hosting an event on drug addiction this hour, and separately on progress, in his view, that's been made toward ending the war between Russia and Ukraine.
And let me ask you, Peter, just to follow up, you talk about the optics. Here we have Tom Homan, who was dispatched to the ground in Minneapolis, clearly aiming to turn down the temperature. It also comes as President Trump was talking about a potential deal with Democrats. Talk about the overall strategy right now. How significant is it for the White House to try to turn down the heat?
What's particularly notable about that possible deal with Democrats is that a lot of the deal is being done between Democrats and the White House, working directly with one another right now. The president, and you played that soundbite from the cabinet meeting earlier, talking about this in ways that we don't often hear him speak, referring specifically to bipartisanship, a bipartisan effort, saying that in his conversations, he believes Democrats don't want there to be a shutdown either. So what it looks like we're going toward is a situation where instead of there being a partial shutdown that would take place as early as tomorrow night, if no agreement is reached by then, that there would be two separate bills in effect. One that would finish the spending bill as it related to all the agencies separate from DHS, and then a separate one on DHS specifically. So on the big agencies, that would kick the can down the road perhaps to September. On DHS, is it going to be 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or 6 weeks, a smaller period of time to try to resolve that? And for Democrats, it's a point of leverage where there are really three separate issues they're focused on right now. Among them, trying to end these roving ICE patrols around the country right now. Separately, trying to create an updated code of conduct and accountability to deal with it. And finally, to try to have a situation where these ICE enforcement officers, where they are not wearing masks, they have ID on all of them, to try to change the policy as it relates to ICE going forward. Kristen.
Peter, breaking it all down for us at the White House. Thank you so much for that great reporting. We really appreciate it. Camila Bernal, let me turn to you on the ground in Minneapolis. Tom Homan saying federal forces will not be pulled out of the city unless local authorities do a better job of cooperating with federal immigration agents. It also comes as Mayor Jacob Frey is in Washington today. Talk a little bit about what you are hearing from local leaders there on the ground in Minneapolis.
Yeah, Kristen, so it's interesting because the first thing that you hear from both the governor and the mayor here in Minneapolis is that they want federal agents out of the city. So that's sort of their first negotiating point from the very beginning. The governor had previously said that, yes, they do cooperate when it comes to state prisons, and they do essentially honor these ICE detainers, which is giving or turning over the people who have some sort of immigration detention or deportation order over to federal authorities. Jacob Frey has said, look, we will cooperate in criminal investigations, but we will not have our police officers essentially working or doing the job of federal agents. And that is part of what he reiterated today in D.C. Take a listen to what he said.
I will believe it when I see it. They have talked about drawing down the numbers in terms of federal agents, ICE, and Border Patrol in Minneapolis, and that is essential. The reality, however, is that we need Operation Metro Surge to end.
So they both want different things. The federal government wants one thing and state and local officials want another. So it really is unclear how they're going to get to an agreement at the end of the day. But again, local leaders here continue to say that what they want is the agents out of the city and really out of the state.
And you just hear Mayor Jacob Frey's defiance there, Camila. Let me ask you about something else that Tom Homan said. He's promising changes when it comes to how these officers interact with the public. And he says that officers who don't act with professionalism, quote, will be dealt with. How were those comments met by the folks on the ground there in Minneapolis? Pretty strong statement.
They are, and I think everyone agrees that there should be some sort of de-escalation. And I will say that being on the ground here, when you don't have federal agents present, you don't see the violence that you saw maybe on Saturday after the shooting of Alex Preddy. Because when they are here, those confrontations get extremely tense. You know, I saw people going up to these federal agents, screaming at them and saying all sorts of really nasty things at them. So I do think once you get rid of the federal agents, you could see some de-escalation. So the question is, when will they actually go, and how are they going to get them to do this? Because Holman said he's going to stay here essentially until this is over. What exactly does that mean? We don't have clear answers to that. So it will be interesting to see how this all develops in terms of an agreement between all of them, Kristen.
Yeah, what exactly would that timeline look like? Camila Bernal, excellent reporting from a frigid Minneapolis. Thank you for braving the temps for us. We really appreciate it. I want to turn to Julia Ainsley now. So, Julia, you heard Tom Homan talk about these targeted operations. Give us a little bit more information. What exactly does that mean?
Well, it's what Tom Homan's been calling for the past year, Kristen. He wants to go after the worst of the worst. He wants ICE officers to be able to walk into a community with a list of people who are tied to crimes that they've been convicted of. And we saw a reversal of that policy starting in June when Greg Bovino was leading the charge in L.A. And it was around that time ICE discontinued a policy they used to have where officers used to have to fill out worksheets before they made arrest on who the person was. Now, because they had so little information about the people they were arresting, the worksheets were being left blank. And so they did away with those. We've reported on those last fall. But it just underscores the point that he wants to return to a day where ICE did their homework, where they knew who it was who they were arresting. And he's not leaving out the possibility that some people could be swept up if they're in the area, if they're around someone. Say you go into a place with a warrant and you find other people who have broken immigration law. He's always said that that's on the table, but it's his priority to go after criminals because he thinks at the end of the day, that's what ICE is there for. And he thinks that's going to be a better move politically, both with the electorate around the country and with how they cooperate with Minnesota.
It was so clear based on his tone
that
he understood the enormity of this moment and that as you say, to some extent, it's about calming the tensions that exist. Let me ask you about the fact that we are actually seeing some changes take place in Maine. What are you tracking there?
Yeah, that's right. We heard from Senator Susan Collins and other government officials from the state of Maine that said that ICE has informed them that they will be pulling out. They started in Lewiston, Maine. And when I say present, ICE has 25 field offices around the country, but they surged more people in. And that had been one area right north of Portland, Maine, where they had started to surge more ICE officers. Now we understand, and Susan Collins said she had multiple conversations asking Kristi Noem to do this, that she's agreed to bring them back. So what a week for Kristi Noem. I mean, she's having to scale back on these plans. She had been so aggressive up until Saturday, and now she's not being called on, as Peter pointed out at the White House press conference. It seems that she's really having to do a 180 here.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're getting this new video of Alex Preddy. What are your sources telling you, Julia, about what this video shows us, and what's the reaction been?
Well, I think the idea is that there's a concern, especially from the family, that that video could be weaponized against Preddy and make people believe that somehow what happened to him on Saturday was deserved because he was an agitator. From what we saw on Saturday, there was nowhere near that kind of behavior. We don't see what happens at the beginning of this video. And even still, even with that altercation, that does not mean, obviously, that he deserved to be killed in an unlawful fatal shooting if the investigation determines that it was. The other thing is that when I went to DHS about this incident, they said they had no records of it. So whatever happened here was not recorded, and we don't believe that it ended in any kind of charge.
Interesting. All right, Julia Ainsley, thank you so much for helping to start us off once again. We really appreciate it. We want to turn now to Capitol Hill, where, as we said, the government is on the verge of a partial shutdown over new demands from Democrats to address the Trump administration's immigration crackdown following the deaths of Alex Preddy and Renee Nicole Good. Today, a key procedural vote to advance a package of 6 appropriations bills failed in the Senate, with all the Democrats and 8 Republicans voting against it. But there may be a deal in the works between Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer and the White House. Joining me now is NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapur. So, Sahil, what is the status of these talks? How close are they to a potential deal?
Hey, Kristen. Well, first off, that Senate vote you mentioned is crucial because the margin of defeat was pretty jarring, 45 to 55. That's 45 in favor, nowhere close to the 60 that they need. Not a single Democrat voted for this package, and 7 Senate Republicans joined Democrats in opposition. So what does that mean? It means Democrats have leverage to press some real demands here because Republicans are nowhere close to the votes without them. Let's take a look at those 3 core demands that Senator Schumer is voicing on behalf of Democrats. There are many of them, but these are the ones the party is unified behind. Ending roving patrols, that's where people are stopped on suspicion of immigration violations, and tighten the rules requiring warrants for arrests. Create a uniform code of conduct that officers have to abide by, and require agents to take off their masks, to carry ID, and wear body cameras when they conduct operations. Now, the near term, Kristen, is complicated because the deadline is tomorrow at midnight, and they still have to pass something and get it signed by President Trump to prevent a shutdown. What there is agreement on is 5 out of the 6 appropriations bills that'll fund about 80% of the government, with the exception of DHS, and they're negotiating right now a short-term funding bill to punt DHS, to keep that open on autopilot for 2 weeks. That's what the Democrats want. Republicans want it a little bit longer, but that's where the negotiations seem centered on. And once that gets done, once they get a deal, if they do, it could move through the Senate very quickly, especially because today is Thursday, tomorrow is the deadline, and many senators candidly want to go home.
Absolutely. How are Senate Republicans reacting to Democrats' proposed reforms, Sahil?
They're mostly sticking close to President Trump. I think the vibes here are extremely different than the vibes around the previous record-long government shutdown instigated by Democrats over funding for the Affordable Care Act, where Republicans essentially told Democrats to pound sand, that they were not going to talk, they were not going to negotiate. This time, Republicans are really spooked by video of an American citizen getting gunned down by someone in their own government, someone who works for their own government, rather, in broad daylight. So Senate Republicans are deferring to the White House and Democrats to cut a deal here, and the Majority Leader John Thune has indicated that he would be in favor of a deal. Not everyone is on board, though. Take a listen to a couple of Republicans on how they're responding.
I think Democrats are wanting some reforms that make sense to me. Body cameras, making ICE more like other agencies. But that's a Band-Aid. To my Democratic friends, I think you have some good ideas. I think the ultimate idea is to end sanctuary city policy is hurting our nation.
Now this idea that we're going to go forward and not support ICE and not fund ICE is the craziest thing in the world. So this idea that we're going to separate out, now we're not going to fund ICE is the most foolish thing I can ever hear of.
Quite remarkable, Kristen, to hear Senator Lindsey Graham say Democrats have some good ideas here that he's willing to take into consideration. I think Senator Scott, who you just heard there, is in the minority among Republicans. If a deal does come together, I expect it to pass with a vast bulk of Republican support.
All right. Well, fast-moving developments there on Capitol Hill. Sahil, thank you for bringing us up to speed on all of them. Great to see you, as always.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.